Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, Metro columnist, and I'm joined by
City Hall reporter Joshua Fechter,
business editor and columnist Greg Jefferson.
And we're recording this on August 10th. This is the week after the proposed city budget was presented to City Council by City Manager Eric Walsh. And Josh, you weren't with us last week, but we talked a little bit about the fact that in many years, the city budget, when it's presented, it's kind of, there's not a lot of drama to it. Everything's, is pretty similar to what we saw the year before. It's kind of a predictable thing. And this year we knew that was going to be different. And part of it is that the city's looking at a shortfall. They're going to have to make cuts, and also a lot of questions about the police budget in light of the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis in May, and calls from activists around the country to reduce funding for police and change the way cities approach policing. So what did we get from last week's budget, and in particularly when it comes to the police budget?
So what we're looking at in terms of, this year's budget, you're right. I mean, this is usually a pretty sort of road affair, like pretty much the only thing that you can expect from the city budget any given year is that, more revenue will grow.
Right.
And that's pretty much the only thing. Obviously, this year's different. The city's facing a lot of revenues shortfall in terms of sales tax and hotel occupancy tax. And as a result, they're eyeing something like $120 million in cuts over the next 2 years. Mm-hmm. And activists who had been campaigning, in the wake of, the death of George Floyd, had been sort of pushing for, the police budget to be among them. And so they were pretty upset when they found out that the proposed police budget for next year, or this upcoming year, actually climbed by $8 million. It was previously at around $479 million in the city's general budget, and it has now climbed to $487 million. Now, like, a lot of that is baked in already because you have these wage increases and increases in healthcare spending that are mandated under the police union's contract. But that wasn't enough for protesters last week. They kind of lined up virtually for the city council meeting on Thursday, and kind of one after another was saying, this is a slap in the face. We told you we wanted more cuts. And basically, city manager Eric Walsh, his whole thing was like, look, I've started making investments in some of the places that you guys were looking for, homelessness, housing, and I'm having a Rick Perry oops moment. There's a third one.
Well, I know that when it comes to like violence, one thing is violence protection. It looks like they talked about consolidating that under Metro Health,
right?
And putting some more of that.
The third one was healthcare. By the way, they're having basically they're consolidating all of their sort of violence prevention programs under Metro Health as a sort of thing. But what Walsh proposed was basically saying, look, like, we don't want to cut this willy-nilly. We don't want to just and Mayor Ron Nirenberg agreed with this. We're not going to just embark on just sort of cutting, left and right for no reason. We're going to be methodical about this. We're going to take our time with it. So over the next several months, they're looking at sort of having this process play out in the Public Safety Committee, where they're going to basically go through and sort of methodically re-examine, okay, what do residents actually expect of the San Antonio Police Department? What can be taken on by other departments? What can we do with the collective bargaining agreement? Like, what can we get at the negotiating table? And basically, what the plan is to come back in April with some kind of sort of broader outline for how to basically tackle the police department going forward. And, activists were really riled up about it. but council was, if anybody disagreed with it, and disagreed with it vehemently, they didn't say so. Everybody seemed to be sort of okay with taking a kind of a slower approach to it.
Yeah. In talking with activists, I mean, what sense do you get when they say defund the police? Like, what exactly does that mean to them?
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, this is like a sort of, it's one of those things where like a protest slogan,
right?
When you apply it in terms of an actual process, can seem a little bit muddy to them. The consensus is, defunding police means spending more on other sort of social services. You're looking at sort of mental health support services, outreach for the homeless, more money spent on affordable housing, more money spent on, job training, things of that nature, things that they would say, it would, sort of relieve the need for police in some instance, where they're saying, look, like public safety has a broader definition than what we've sort of thought. But, at the center of it, it does mean spend less on police.
Mm-hmm. And they're basically talking about a proactive versus a reactive approach, trying to deal with systemic root causes of crime rather than just punishing people after crimes have been committed.
Right.
Right. But, and they're also talking about doing a lot of that outside of the police department. So it sounds like this budget does include increased funding for social services, for housing, for chemical, drug addiction, that kind of thing. Or did I miss something? Or
no, you're right. But they weren't particularly satisfied with that. They kind of thought the amounts that were put into it were pretty paltry too.
Are they just lashed to this, kind of clunky phrase, defund the police, and they just need to see cuts regardless? Or it sounds like there's movement on the city's behalf to kind of get them what they're after.
Yeah,
they just need some blood. Some cuts.
And I think that's definitely true. But like the other thing that springs to mind to me about this is that for weeks, Chief McManus, the mayor, city manager, they met with our editorial board. They spoke to a bunch of people in public, basically saying like they didn't want to just go ahead and make sort of broad cuts. So, the city manager was saying for weeks, like, look, like, I don't think this is something that you handle in one budget. Like, this is something I think is going to take years. So like he was already laying the groundwork for basically what was happening and, or the proposed budget that he put down last week. And, so activists had plenty of time to basically sort of expect that and to be prepared for it. To some degree, I can understand like why they're so, sort of upset about it, but also like what did they expect, given that the fact that the city manager had been signaling this for several months now.
Well, and it does seem strange just from their standpoint. It must seem odd that so you're increasing spending on social services outside of the police department, yet the police budget is going up by $8 million. It does create some cognitive dissonance, I think. So it's like, okay, if you're asking them to do less of, doing less of the social work, then, why do they need $8 million more? It does kind of make sense from their standpoint.
And it gets back to Josh's point, which is that some of this is baked in. And I think if we didn't have the sort of already contractually guaranteed wage increases and healthcare cost increases, then the narrative might be a little different. People might, we'd look at it and say, I don't know what the budget went down 5 million or something. I don't know the exact figure, but either way, it probably wouldn't be satisfying to activists because it would be, it would be minor cuts, but it might be perceived a little differently.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, Josh, you talked about the 120 million in cuts over the next 2 years. What's the major area that's going to be cut? Is it street maintenance, or are there other things?
Well, yeah, you're seeing another cut in your street maintenance budget. It's going down by 8 million from I believe it was 100 and God, I'm blanking on the exact number. It's about 8 million less than last year. It's about 102 million this year. Mm-hmm. You're seeing cuts there. You're seeing cuts too, and this should please activists to some extent. Cuts in police overtime. Basically, the city manager says, "Look, like we've got an incoming cadet class that basically relieves the need for spending on police overtime." You're also seeing, this a hiring freeze that the city instituted earlier this year. Basically, that's going to help them along with other sort of pauses and pay increases. That it's going to save about 14 million in total over the next year or so. You're dealing with basically this sort of, I don't want to say catastrophic, but you're seeing like a $127 million loss in revenue over this first year. And that's all from, depleting sales and hotel occupancy tax. And, the sales tax is a little bit better than what they thought it was going to be. But I mean, they're expecting the hotel occupancy tax is going to take somewhere between 5 to 7 years to recover. So, I mean, this is going to be something that it's not just going to be this budget. It's going to reverberate for at least the next 5 years.
Right. And I think one of the things to look at is, I mean, I know the local arts community is really dependent on money from the hotel occupancy tax. And I think that's going to be an interesting thing to watch over the next few months to see the impact. I think some local arts organizations are probably going to be really affected by this. I wanted to talk a little bit about what we're going to be seeing on the ballot in November, where it's looking like we're going to have 3 sales tax propositions on the ballot. One of them to continue the pre-K 4 SA program, which was launched by former Mayor Julian Castro. It's a 1/8 cent sales tax. We're also going to see a proposed 1/8 cent sales tax for Mayor Ron Nirenberg, which would be workforce development, and is basically taking an existing tax that has gone to aquifer protection and linear creekways and applying it to workforce development. And then the oddity in this is that there's going to be a third item, which is asking people to hand over that workforce development sales tax to public transit after 4 years. This is going to get kind of complicated. I think I think it is important for people to know that we're not looking at any tax increases. These are existing taxes, but how complicated, and Greg, I'll start with you. I mean, how complicated do you think this is going to be for voters? You've dealt with the campaigns. How do you make the case for people? That I think the argument is going to be there's going to be an overarching campaign. Yes, on all 3. But how do you explain this?
Well, I mean, that's assuming that these campaigns can cut through all of the noise of what is going to be. Everybody knows this is going to be a chaotic election. Trump is going to make it so. I mean, I have no idea how how much money you would need to cut through, all of that noise to make the case for these 3 propositions. Added to that, I mean, you've got the fact that, we're still likely to be in a recession with higher than normal unemployment. Everybody's got less money, and we're talking about, taxing ourselves in 3 different propositions on the same ballot. I mean, it's going to be a real challenge. I mean, I don't know how you work a campaign like that. I would imagine, like Kelton Morgan mentioned in your column over the weekend, I think it was over the weekend, either that or Friday. Mm-hmm. Anyway, you do a lot of direct mail, a lot of texting. You get as close to the voter as you can, and you kind of avoid the bigger ticket items like television ads and things like that, because I mean you're just going to be drowned out on the airways. It's a complicated, it would be a complicated set of propositions. Even if it weren't on a presidential ballot, you've got a lot of competing interests. you've got a lot of supporters of aquifer protection, and you're talking about defunding that. I mean, I know that Nuremberg is trying to come up with an alternative funding source, to buy property over the Edwards Aquifer, but we don't know anything about it.
People are concerned about that. I mean, I hear a lot.
Yeah, they are. And so you're taking away, you're taking away a project that voters have supported, 5 times now, 4 or 5 times. They've overwhelmingly. Yeah. So, and then
4 times.
Yeah. And you're replacing it with workforce development that at this point is pretty, it's not particularly well defined. And it's really not a role the city has, been in any way serious about up to this point. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be a real challenge.
One footnote to this is that the public transit campaign, and I think that it's one thing that people should note is that I think the 4-year wait for that public transit, for the money to go to public transit, I think that's going to be downplayed in the election. I just don't think you want to confuse people by saying vote for this, because it's really important that people be able to get to work and have good bus service, right. And it's going to take 4 years before we get the money. I think that's just not going to be talked about a lot. But the person running the campaign, as you mentioned, is Kelton Morgan, who was Ron Nuremberg's campaign manager going back to 2013 when he first ran for city council. They parted ways earlier this year, but I think that's just kind of a interesting sort of element to this plot as we go forward. Josh, you wrote about the challenge of the mayor trying to get the workforce development program passed. As Greg said, this isn't something the city hasn't done before. I mean, when you look at this, what do you see as the challenges for him to get this passed?
Yeah, well, the thing that keeps nagging at me is, I keep asking like how they're going to be, and I think like what you said about this already kind of puts the pin in this, but it's like, how do you tell voters, like, okay, we're going to spend, this pot of money for 4 years, $154 million that you're going to pay in sales tax for 4 years. But at the same time, you're also going to vote to use that same pot of money or the same tax on public transit expansion, but we're not going to do that for 4 years. And like, it's honestly something I had not thought of before you said it, where it's like, oh, you just kind of ignore that in the campaign messaging, because like that would just confuse everybody.
Right.
Cutting through the sort of the morass of this election is going to be a real challenge. But, I think this is, something that occurred to me was that like, this is kind of the first time that voters have had to vote on kind of like a big sort of Nuremberg plan. He's attracted to these kinds of big sort of projects where you look, over, a certain period of years, sort of like mid to long-term projects that are sort of aimed at kind of trying to transform how the city operates and, how the city is shaped. You look at, his housing policy task force, this plan to basically figure out how to make housing more affordable, given the crisis in housing that we're facing. The climate action adaptation plan. I forget the exact order of those words, but where basically these are sort of like gigantic, like years long efforts that he is embarked on. And I think it's interesting that this is the first time that voters will have a sort of a direct say in one of those. And I wonder kind of like what the appetite is for something that long term.
I'd like to just go back to the climate action plan. I mean, so there's no, like, voters are never going to have a say on this. And I'm pretty sure that in a few years from now, we'll be trying to remember the details of that plan. I think it was just kind of, it happened, it was approved, and we're not going to hear anything about it in the future. Like I just can't actually see it guiding any kind of policy discussion or any kind of spending decision.
Yeah, I think
so. That's the kind of
right.
stuff. Yeah, I mean, we've gotten a lot of that out of City Hall.
Well, I wanted, before we switch topics, I wanted to get your thoughts, quick thoughts on if you had to rank these three items, pre-K, VIA, and workforce development, in order of their likelihood of passing, 1, 2, 3, the one being the one most likely to pass. How would you rank them, Josh?
For me, I think it goes pre-K, workforce development, and then VIA. I mean, like you look at how public transit is sort of perceived. Like there are a couple things that are working against them. One is that VIA is not particularly efficient. Like, it takes a long time to get to your destination. You're waiting for a long time at the bus stop. The North Side voters who are likely to not really be on board with this, kind of have sort of an antipathy towards public transit. Right. But then you also just have like, this other line that VIA will say is like, okay, well, like we're not even at like full funding. We're actually like way behind, like, as a percentage basis, like how other major metropolitan areas, public transit agencies operate. Like, and so like, that's sort of a tough thing. Talking with, Nelson Wolf on Friday, he was saying, look, like, I think people can kind of pair pre-K for SA and workforce development together to some degree. Like what you're talking about is sort of long-term sort of ideas that will boost sort of, people's economic standing. And people don't really think, and he wasn't saying this, but like people don't really think of like VIA as being sort of that engine. So I think maybe part of what they're going to have to try to message. It's like, that's look, right. Like these three are all sort of towards the same purpose.
Yeah, I think that's right. What do you think, Greg?
I hate to say it, but I actually agree with Josh. Whenever I agree with Josh, it makes me think like something. Am I missing something? I don't know. I do. I agree that pre-K for SA is like number one. Workforce development, I think, would be number two, with a big caveat, though. I mean, if proponents of this plan remain really squishy about the details and kind of in the campaign, it kind of strikes voters as being, kind of a money suck, and you really don't know what you're getting out of it. Yeah. Then it could be in trouble. But if the campaign, if this is about training up workers to put them in a bit better position to get higher paying jobs, that's likely a really good message. And essentially that's what the program is. But, if there's a sense that it's kind of loosey-goosey and you don't really know where the money is going, it could be in trouble.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I mean, Josh is right. Mass transit, it just, unless you're using it, there's just not a lot of, first of all, there's not a lot of thought paid to it among, I think, most voters if they don't use the bus system. And that's too bad. I mean, it's really an essential service in the city, and it affects, a ton of people, yet it's always kind of given short shrift politically and, at the polls. So we'll see. I mean, education initiatives usually do pretty well, but I really hope pre-K for SA especially doesn't get caught up in any kind of fallout from a messy election. I mean, that would be a real tragedy.
That's the danger. Yeah. Well, I as much as I hate to say this, I agree with both of you, and so
there's a lot of hate going around here.
God, it probably won't happen again. But no, I think pre-K is definitely the one that is on the in the best position, and I think we all can tell. I think we all get feedback from readers and just in talking to people in the community. There's a lot of negative thought out there about VIA, whether it's fair or not. And as you said, Greg, people who don't use public transit, they tend to question, whether, why we need to be putting more money into this. So,
and just one last thing, I was thinking, like, obviously, like, pre-K was supposed to go up for renewal in May. This thing called the coronavirus happened, and so they postponed it to November. But like, let's remember, like, the reason that they were supposed to go in May was that they didn't want to get caught up with this the VIA sales tax plan in November. So they're kind of right where they don't want to be.
Great point. Before we wrap things up, I wanted to talk briefly about Texas District 121. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about U.S. District 21, in which Republican Chip Roy is facing a challenge from Democrat Wendy Davis. That has been a solidly Republican seat. Texas District 121 is kind of a smaller version of it, or it is contained within U.S. District 21. It's basically all within Bexar County. It's Northeast San Antonio, Alamo Heights, Terrell Hills, Olmos Park. And this was Joe Straus's seat. And for 18 years, from 2000 to 2018, you didn't even have a Democrat running in that district because there was kind of no point to it. Selena Montoya, who is a former radio journalist and nonprofit founder, ran in 2018 against Steve Allison when it was an open seat, and lost by 8.4%. She's doing really well with fundraising this year. There was a recent poll from ECM Research, which is a California firm, and you had the House Democratic Campaign Committee and a few other groups funding this poll, and it showed, and we have to take all these polls with a grain of salt, but it showed her 7 points ahead of Steve Allison. I'm sure there are people, I find myself wondering if this could be right, but this is a race for sure. And we're looking with both that District 21, the congressional seat, and this House district seat, we're looking at competitive races where we just never even thought we would have them. Steve Allison is not the kind of flamethrower that Chip Roy is, so he's not as divisive. He's very much in the Joe Straus mold. He's a supporter of public education. He's a bipartisan sort of person. But at the same time, Selena Montoya might not be as divisive. Certainly, I think is not as divisive as maybe Wendy Davis is, because she was caricatured in Republican circles years back as kind of a one-issue candidate because of her filibuster against abortion restrictions. So, Greg, when you look at this race, what do you think?
I think you're right to question the validity of a poll showing her 7 points ahead. But I mean, if it's a competitive race, I mean, that's a pretty bad sign for Republicans. Because as you said, I mean, Steve Allison is no Chip Roy. I mean, he's not a kind of fiery ideologue. He seems a lot more thoughtful than Chip Roy as a lawmaker. Right. And if he's in trouble, that seems to me that, you've got Republicans who just have not bought into Trumpism reacting to it. And my guess would be you're seeing a lot of Republican women just rejecting the politics of Donald Trump. And that's maybe seeping down to the local level. I mean, to me, that would be a pretty good explanation about why this would be a competitive race, if it is.
And you've got the Democrats need to flip 9 seats and hold on to all the ones they have in order to take control of the Texas House, which we haven't seen in nearly 20 years. And this is one of the ones they're looking at. And I think maybe a few months ago it might have not seemed that realistic, but I think they're looking at this now and saying that this is one they have a shot at. I think we're gonna stop there. Want to thank everybody for listening in. Hope everybody's doing well, and we'll be back next week. Take care.